fly away. And so now I really want to introduce someone who I got to meet the first time I spoke at the Claremont Center, and she greeted me with open arms and open heart, very loving, kind person, Reverend Marni Martin. And she is the spiritual director of the Golden Circle Center for Spiritual Living. Did I say that right? In Orange County. But she also is very active at the Claremont Center, and she's an absolutely wonderful, exciting, dynamic speaker. So let's give her a round of applause and welcome her up to the stage.
Italian, I need my hands when I preach. Okay, so let me just get situated. So welcome everybody to Westlake this morning. Before I begin any service, I like to do my statement of truth. So this is the deal. If we will just take a breath in and let it all go. We're here to birth greatness and express the divine. So if you will please repeat after me. I release any confusion, ignorance, and fear, which results in my unnecessary suffering. Any conscious or unconscious resistance I have to receive God's riches, blessings, or guidance. Can somebody come help me, because I'm not savvy to, is there a way we can, okay. Today my mind is open to receive the Word of God. And I accept my healing now. Okay, we get to do something new. Alrighty then. Okay, so, good morning everyone. Our talk title today is According to Ernest. So Ernest is an interesting character because Ernest was the man. I love him deeply. Meeting Ernest Holmes the way that I did changed the trajectory of my life. I am celebrating many years in religious science. I came into religious science when I was 11 years old, and I am turning 45 next Thursday. So it's been a long journey, and I've survived church. So Ernest is an interesting man because really Ernest was somebody that was ahead of his time. And the reason being is because so much about what he talks about is what we're living today. And so Ernest talks about the principle of law. Every Sunday you hear, when you read the books, you hear the sermons, you go to your classes, what we talk about and we want to imbue into your spirit is that there is a law, as Ernest Holmes says, that there is a power and there is a presence, and this is a law in your life. Now, the deal is this, that you can use this good, you can use this presence of God in your life any which way that you like. And it's very interesting, thank you so much. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah? Oh, sweet. Okay, so it's very interesting because we teach here. Now, remember the first time hearing about spirit and hearing that God was impersonal. You've all heard this, that there's an impersonal, and I thought, well, that's awful, right? I want a warm, fuzzy God. And yet there is an impersonalness to this law. And the reason is because it works for everybody. It doesn't care who you are, what your background is, what your deficits have been, your failures, or your fears. This law and this presence is so powerful because it literally can change your world. It changes our world. And the reason that it can change our world is because it's the construct by which creates the universe that we live in. It's that which builds out of the seeming nothing the actual foundation. We teach here about foundation, don't we, often? Now, when I first started in religious science, my life was going through a very tumultuous time. And I grew up with a single mother. My father didn't honor his obligations. And so we were on a spiritual journey. And so something happened when I stepped into a science of mind. I remember my first minister was Reverend Allen. Something happened that I got. And what I heard my minister say is that God is right where you are. That God, this presence, that there is a power, and that I had control. I think, I don't even want to say control, but I want to say this, that I was at choice. The greatest powerful word in spiritual understanding is that you have options. There are choices. We can choose to use this for a force of good. We can choose to create the life that we desire. But the question for many of us is, do we know what it is that we desire? I have people that come into counseling sometimes, and it's very interesting. They'll think that they're asking for a particular, they want a car, a husband, whatever it is. And when, in the 80s, we were all about manifesting parking spaces and husbands. But what I have found is that people, that's what they think they want. And what we all really want is we want some God. We will not make it on this planet unless we awaken to a deeper desire, a deeper intention. So when I was 11 years old and I came into this philosophy, and I'm going through this thing called life, there was a movie Barbra Streisand produced, directed, and starred in. It was Yentl. Yentl got me through puberty and has gotten me through many things, but there's a soundtrack in there that is phenomenal. So if you haven't seen the movie and you haven't listened to the music, take some time. Yentl was the young girl who had to pretend that she was something that she wasn't in order to attain the knowledge of God. And the reason was because at the time on the planet, she was a woman, a young girl who desired to enter religious training, except it was limited to the males. And so her father was a Talmud teacher, and so in secret, her father would teach her the laws of God. And so Yentl was quite the woman, because at that time, her mother had died, so she really was a girl on her own with her father. And so she so desperately wanted to study the Word of God that she pretended to be a boy. And how many times have we pretended to be something that we're not in order to get what it is that we think that we want? But the desire of God goes beyond just the tangible, the body, the form, and the effect. The desire of the heart says that you want to know God in an intimate relationship. And so what has happened over the years for me as I've journeyed through this thing called religious science is that I have fallen in love, and I have fallen in love with God. And there's a deep relationship that I have, and it's the greatest relationship that any of us will ever have, and it's the one that you have with yourself. It's the one that you realize that there's the Holy Spirit that lives within you. And that presence within you is so mindful and so available that at any moment, even in the darkest hour, even when things seem to be in flux, even when we see on the newspapers, I was just disheartened yesterday when I'm reading in the newspapers that now the imam and secretary over in a mosque in Queens was murdered. Something is wrong. And so we come to church to collectively cause something to be right. And so we have to cause something. Ernest Holmes says that the only thing that moves is mind. Do you know that? Now, when I first heard this, that struck terror and relief in my heart. Because it means it's really simple, and it means at the same time that it's really simple. So I'm bound to screw it up. So to understand that, as Ernest Holmes says, that the only thing that moves his mind is to understand that we're called not to settle for just anything. That if there's a mark on our heart and a desire within our soul, that Spirit is causing something to come forth by means of this deep feeling so that you can change the world. Now, Ernest says that if you change your thinking, right? What does he say? Change your thinking? Okay. So the question for many of us is, what have we been thinking? Right? Because if your life hasn't changed, how far along has the thought moved? But the real question isn't whether or not we're going to change. See, we say change your thinking. You can't change your mind because mind is unchangeable. The presence of God is eternal, infinite, indestructible. God just is as it is. But this power that lives within us by means of this creative law allows us to take this energy, this life force, this God that lives within us, the Holy Spirit that abides from our very own thought. And it allows us to decide in which direction we will create with this beautiful power. So Yentl in the movie she was quite a character. And so there's a point where she goes into the bookseller's bookstore and she's looking for spiritual literature. And so she says, the bookseller looks at her and says, you're in the wrong place. Storybooks for women are over there. And Yentl holding the books, she says, well, I like this one, please. And the bookseller says, but sacred books are for men. And so Yentl says, but why? Well, it's the law. And Yentl asks the question, well, where is it written, my kind of girl? And he says, it doesn't matter where it's written, it's the law. Well, if it's the law, it must be written somewhere. Perhaps it's in here, she says. And then she says, I'll take it. And so the question for many of us is, where is it written? Where is the law that enacts the change in your life? Where is it written? It isn't by what we say here, what it's going to be for you. It's written in the law of your own life. It's written by the power and the presence of you within to use this law for a purposeful meaning. There's a presence and a power in us, as Ernest Holmes says, and this is really important. I love it. He says, it's not our business to run the entire universe, but we do have a perfect right to govern our own environment. Nothing can hinder our doing this but doubt and a limited concept of our relationship to the universe. So what Ernest is telling us here is that everything comes back to the center of the soul. He's saying that everything about your life and the projection heretofore is a result of what it is that you hold in relationship, what you really believe God is, and more importantly, where you believe God is. Where does God reside? Now, the old paradigm of religion says that God lives over yonder, and that if you're really nice, you might get into the club, and if you're really naughty, you're going to get thrown out. Well, what we teach here, and what according to Ernest and all great philosophers on the planet that tell us, is that this presence is already embedded within you because it's your very nature. Now, I have been in a program, it had been in my heart for many years. I wanted to be a chaplain, so I'm at a program near where my home is, and so I am in this internship program, and so I get to spend a lot of time with all types of people. And yesterday I met a young woman, and when I walked into her room, I have to tell you, she was stunning, like physically beautiful. And I was deeply touched. We began to talk, and I said, would you like a visit? I'm Chaplain Marni. And sometimes you get no, and sometimes you get, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in religion. I said, oh God, either do I, let's talk. And so I sat down with her, and she began to talk to me. And I said, tell me about a little bit how you got here. And so she said that she was a drug user. She was a heroin addict. And they had found her on the street. And when she spoke, she had lost all of her teeth. She'd been a drug addict for, I said, how long? All of her life. She's 33 years old. She said, for over 20 years, I've been a drug addict. And I said, my love, please tell me how this happened. And this woman, I want to tell you, gave me the most honest answer I have ever heard anybody ever give to a question that I may have asked. And she said, you want to know how I ended up a drug addict? And a prostitute? And away from my child? She said, I was given everything. I said, what? She said, yes. I was given everything. Anything that money could buy, I was given. I grew up in the richest city, in the richest town, in the richest part of New Jersey. I had everything. And I said, tell me more about this. And she said, I was given everything, and my father would just hand it over to me. She goes, my allowance was like $200 a day, starting at 11 years old. And so I listened to her, and we began to really talk, and And she said, I said, tell me, what did you want besides things? And she said, I wanted my father. But I didn't have him. But he gave me things. And so as I was listening to this young woman, I realized that many times this is what we do with this creative power. We think we want things, right? We forget and we say, well, we want to go to church, right? We want to build a church, and yet we're taught that you don't go to church. You have to be the church. This presence has to be so deep within you, rooted in every cell of you, that everything about you, as you move along your day through chaos and through calm, that you are so centered on God that your relationship is first and foremost, that it is at the center of your soul because it is at the center of your thinking. It's because you are so deeply in love with the presence of the Lord that you remember that there is a purpose and that there is a meaning. And with purpose and meaning, you have a reason, a purpose, and a heartfelt desire from the depth of your soul to create the change that is required. So that when we say that we desire a world that works for everyone, that it isn't just lingo, but that it's action. Much of what we do here with the power and the presence of God, it is an actionable cause. It means that we must cause something to happen. You know, I have conversations many times with people, and I had one the other day with a congregant, and we were discussing, welcome to church, there's always interesting drama going on, and so some stuff had been going on. And so she said, well, I just know, have you heard this one before? All is in divine order, and we're just going to have faith. And so as a good minister, I said, what the hell does that mean? What does that mean? And that's the real question. So Ernest talks about faith. He says that faith is an active law, that it really is a principle. But beyond this idea of faith, it means that you can't just think about it. You've got to take action. And he refers to this as the law of growth. Remember, we're talking about that there is a presence of love that is processed through and articulated out of the law, and therefore you can create the life that you desire. And Ernest Holmes talks about the law of growth, and he says this as follows. He says, that principle, the law of growth, which contains everything necessary to the fulfillment of any idea which has been placed in the creative soil of mind, as the seed placed in the ground, it must have a definite period of time for the development of the life germ into the perfect plant. So does the law of growth require time for the fulfillment of an idea. Man drops an idea into mind and then remains faithful to it until the law of growth delivers to him in the manifestation of his idea in form. So what is Ernest telling us here? He's saying that the process of creation takes time. It's 365 days for a year, 24 hours in a day, 60 seconds to a minute, 9 months to a baby. And so what happens is that many times in religious science, we do the I got ants in my pants dance. Well, I prayed about it, why isn't it here? Well, why didn't it happen? But I prayed about it, it doesn't work. And then Ernest says, how lovely. Because by you acknowledging or making the statement, that proclamation by means of the power of your word, that when you said that it didn't work by not working because you said that it wouldn't work. Right? And so we do this dance. But what we are called to do is to be the men and women that are willing to stand up to the question of where is it written of how it's supposed to be? Where is the trajectory of this church, your life, this planet? And so as I was talking to the young girl yesterday, she was telling me the story, and I asked her how she got here from the East Coast, and she said that she had ended up at a park here. She'd come cross country, and she ended up at a park called Ganesha Park. And that really was the beginning of her drug use here on the West Coast. Now, I went to a high school down the street called Ganesha, named after Ganesh, the great Hindu god. I didn't realize that at the time. It's a public school, who knew? And so so I was watching how my life had intertwined with this young woman. See, this is how the hand of God works, is that Spirit will send you people to remind you who you are, where you've come from, and where you want to go. So we listen to the voice of God because we understand that if what we teach here is true, that God is everywhere, then everywhere is the information and the thoughtfulness that is required for us to return to center. It means that everything can be used to bring us back to the center of our attention. And thus, in turn, by placing our attention once again, we are reminded that fire within us is rekindled, and we begin to realize that we had an intention, that there was a very clear, concise intention of our soul. And we all made the agreements before we came into the incarnation. And the agreement is that what? We're going to birth heaven onto earth, because it's not going to happen for us. As Ernest Holmes says, it has to happen through us. And so we're the sacred vessel by which the light of God can pour forth and show other people that the darkness can be banished simply by remembering who they are. And so this young girl was telling me the story, and she said, you know, I was in this park, and I was reminded of my journey in religious sciences. I'm going through all these, I'm doing inventory. I'm doing a big inventory because for over 26 years I had the same practitioner. Can you believe that? She was like my best friend. She was 83, and she passed in December. And so I have been in mourning for her. I loved her so much, and in church you need somebody to talk to that will talk you down from the ledge periodically. And she was that for me. And so now I have to turn within and I talk to her spirit, but I cannot pick up the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning. And this is painful. It's just as painful for somebody who understands that what if we teach her every week that God is all that there is, that there's a perfection within you, that the wholeness of God is health as you, then can you imagine the pain and the suffering that it feels like if you have disease in your body? And many times we punish and banish ourselves, and we say, well, am I doing something wrong? And the question isn't whether we're doing something wrong. The question is, what are you doing right? Many times in religious science, we ask the wrong question. And we go to the wrong place in consciousness to deliver us from this idea that we are fragmented from our source. And so when I grew up in religious science, and I was going through this experience, I realized that much of my power and the center of my being as an adult was centered in this acknowledgement that really what Ernest is talking about was that he was talking about spiritual authority. And that really was the life of Jesus. That's the life of all great spiritual masters. That you have a spiritual authority and that your word can construct a new paradigm. And that's what we do with our prayer life. That's what we do when we come into relationship with this holiness. And we understand, as Ernest Holmes says, that the law and the word. Now this is what he says about the law and the word. He says it's the creative power of mental law, and it's set in motion by the word consciously spoken. Now what did he just say? Ernest says that the law and the word, it's the creative power of mental law as it's set in motion by the word which is consciously spoken. But if we are continuing to serve two masters in our mind, and we're continuing to look at the body, the form, and the effect, the deficit, the past, and the failure, then we're not focusing and placing our attention on the divine. But it's very hard, isn't it, when you live in a world that says that there's not enough. And yet we come here every week and we say, but there is enough, because we just say God is all that there is, right? We say every week that the faith will get us through. But there's more to this creative endeavor. And the creativity has to come from sometimes angst in us. There's something that will pull us to a place of center, and sometimes it's when you get your butt whooped. And so that young girl yesterday, she looked at me and she was sobbing and she said, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. I don't want to be a prostitute anymore. I don't want this life anymore. I want something different. And so the gift that I can bring as a religious scientist, as somebody who practices these principles, is that I can be the one who can speak the truth into existence. No better or less than any other person's prayer. But there is an empowerment that comes when you understand how God works, not just where God lives and moves and has its beingness, but how does God work? And what Ernest is telling us here all the time is that God is working all the time. In fact, he says that this law, that there has to be a definite use of this law. And he says this, and this is very key. And I remember when I was probably 15 at a camp, and I remember we were talking about this, and it really sunk in because it empowered me. Many years later, I would see some of my friends that I went to camp with in high school, and you know, I wasn't a squirrely, I was a mouthy kid. I know you're not surprised, but I wasn't a squirrely kid, right? And the reason is because I was taught from a very young age that the power and the center of my being was in my thinking. And so for me, drugs and alcohol, they weren't an option, not because it's morally unconscionable, but because it took me off the center of my source. And if you have a clouded thought, you cannot have a clear God, because that was the connection point. And so Ernest says this. He says, you have two options, okay? We are either using the law definitely or indefinitely, consciously or chaotically. Scientific practice consists in conscious application of thought for specific purposes. And so what is Ernest telling us here? He's saying that you have got to have a precise purpose, not a plan, but a purpose. You have to have an intention. And the way that we absolutely give life to our intention is by means of our attention. So the opportunity is that at any time when anything's going on in our life, that we can be brought back to center. And it can be done two ways. You can have it the easy way, or you can have it the hard way. Now, this young girl was given everything around the same age that I had nothing. And yet somehow our paths crossed in a very interesting way. Because as she is down the street at a park being beaten by her boyfriend and shooting up heroin and forgetting who she was, I had been at that time decades earlier, about a decade before, at a high school where every day I would wake up and I would be so excited about learning about religious science, because I used to leave church and I was such a dork. I would run home like every day, and I had a little wall, and I'd put all my little prayers on the wall, and I would really practice this. And Spirit had put in my heart that I was going to be a minister. And I was young, I didn't know better. And there was a time when I had gone to my mother in high school. And this is a very important part of my experience, and it's something that my mother and I laugh about often, because it's, when I tell you this stuff works, I'm telling you the truth. Now, I remember the first couple weeks that we had gone to religious science, and we didn't have money to pay the rent. We were going to be homeless. And so I remember my mother was so completely distraught. We went to church, and we sat in the fourth pew, and my mother prayed with the minister after service. Now, my minister at that time was so rich. He was such a wealthy man. He'd made all his money in real estate that he took a salary from the church, and he tithed back every penny to the church and then some. And he could have written my mother a check easily, but he did something more empowering. He did something that would change the life of my mother, because it changed her consciousness and it changed my consciousness. He prayed with her. And he prayed a prayer. And it was the moment where my mother knew that she knew that she knew, just as Ernest Holmes says, that you can use this stuff and it can go this way, or you can choose to use this power and it can go that way. And so as they prayed, 3 days later, my mother got a letter in the mail, and it was from the IRS or something, and it had been a long lost money due to her, and it was literally for the exact amount, down to the penny, that she needed to pay the rent. I was hooked from that moment on. It was the moment that I knew that there was something mystical and magical about this stuff. And so I went to my mother in high school, and I remember my girlfriends were going to eat lunch. I would chew a piece of gum all day long. Clearly, I'm not starving, so don't worry. Everything turned out fine. And I went to my mom, and I said, "Mom, can I have $1?" And I remember my mom was so distraught, and she said, $1? $1? She didn't even have $1 to give me. And yet, that was hard. There are moments in your life where there may be that there's an appearance that there's not enough. You might not have gotten the right diagnosis. There may not just be enough of anything, right? And yet what Ernest is always telling us here is to come back to the center of God, come back to the soul of God. Come back to that place where you know that if you intend to know that you know that you know, that God is working everything out for your highest and for your best, and it's because it's the spiritual law on this planet that there is purpose, there is meaning in everything. Now, Shannon Adler says that Satan will tempt you with many things in life, right? Isn't that a temptation to say, this stuff doesn't work? How am I ever going to make it in life? And yet, Shannon says that Satan will tempt you with many things in life, but the most powerful is the temptation to be grateful for what you have when it's not the best that life has to offer you. It means that you will settle. It means that you will give up and give in because it's good enough. And God doesn't want good enough. God wants great enough. And the reason that we need great enough is because we need the men and the women who come through these doors to be the men and women who in a time of crisis on the planet will speak into existence the truth about individuals, about leaders, and about countries. That you will speak into existence the truth that if what we say here is real and tangible, that God is love, then it means that we will be love. Not by our word, but by our deed and by our actions. Because when you love, right? When you love, you set forth and unleash the greatest law of all. It's a course correction. It says that people will remember that the same power that you're talking about, that you read about, and that at moments you've experienced, it lives within them. And so before I left that young woman yesterday, we talked and we prayed. And I was able to speak and tell her the truth. She sobbed because she had to leave her little dog on the street, and she didn't know if she was going to see him, and she sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. She said, "You don't understand. He saved my life. He came up to me in the encampment, and he came up and he licked me," and she said, "I wanted to kill myself. I had no purpose. There was no meaning to my life. I'm a drug addict. I'm a whore." And she said, "That little puppy gave me purpose and meaning." And so we prayed so that she would know that that little puppy was safe. God will send you messages in the most unique, special way. But you have to have the ears of God and the heart of openness to receive what God is trying to teach you. And so whatever it is that you may be going through, maybe you had to be the person, the one that had to pretend that you were something that you weren't so that you could learn the lessons of God, the word of spirit. But what we teach here is that God is a freebie, that this power and this presence is available to each of us. There's a reason as to why you continue to come to this center, because there is a call and a mark on your soul. So you don't see, I don't think, a lot of deficit maybe in this community. I've been here many times. You've got a beautiful community here. But I will tell you something. There is something that happens on the planet way worse than even homelessness. It's the heartlessness. It's those people who have so much who do not know how to give and do not know how to share, because they don't understand that what they have is for the purpose of giving. But we are different people. We're the people of God. We're the people who understand that this creative power comes from a place deep within us. It is a mark that has been there since before time. And so I'm going to leave you with this. It's what Ernest Holmes says. He says this in this thing called You. He says, your creative power comes from the originating spirit itself, which knows no limit. It's conditioned by no circumstance and governed by no law outside of itself. He's talking about the presence of God in your mind. He also goes on, and this is what he says. Ernest says this. He says, in order for you to get to where you want to be, you're required to do some work, because this is work. So like we said, you can say, well, God's going to take care of it all. Well, that's lovely. And how? And Ernest Holmes says that you must throw yourself with complete abandon into the all-consuming fire of inward conviction. He says that you have to know that you know that you know. In the face of adversity, in the face of fear, and in face of it all. It's very hard in a world when we see what the headlines are. It's very hard in a world when we see how many people I see who are blitzed out of their mind. So many people at the hospital. It's because they have no idea what we're talking about here. This is why we have a church. This is why we become the church. This is why, because when you leave here, God will send you people and you will speak blessing into their life. You will be the one that speaks the word so that they remember who they are. But the agreement is this. You have to remember who you are. You have to remember why. And what is the purpose of your life? My friends, what is the purpose of this church? And so, the question for many of us is, where is it written? I'm going to tell you, it's written nowhere. It's written in the hearts and the consciousness of the people, because without a vision, the people will perish. And so this is it. Shannon Adler says this, and then we shall pray. God has a plan, and guess what? The plan is to stop waiting for him to do everything for you. The person, the change you want in your life is not a sign, not a clue, not a wish, not a prayer, a matter of timing. And I'm even going to add for you, my friends, not even a new senior minister. She says it's work, it's devotion. And like any dream, if you want it, then God will open doors for you to obtain it. You just have to stop setting the bar so low that everything below is a sign from God and everything above is asking too much. So the question for you today, my friends, is why settle for just a piece of sky? You have a big God and you have a big life. So let's take a moment and let's turn within. And so we are powerful, spiritual, creative, conscious, giving beings who, through our intention and action, use and apply these spiritual principles. As a result, we transform our lives, our community, and heal the planet. Ernest Holmes says that there's a creative power and that you can use this power any which way you desire. But you have to have a desire. You have to want something more than what you've had. You have to know that even though you may not have what it takes in this moment, if it's sobriety or even if it's $1, you have to know that you know that you know that God is flinging the doors wide open so that you can see as God sees. That you can see that with God all things are possible. With God, that presence of your mind, that there's a center of your knowing that knows, that as you intend, so shall you reap. For that which is of thought becomes of flesh. And so for some of you today, you might be dealing with a diagnosis. You might be dealing with a deficit or fear or a failure. You may not even know what to do next. But I shall speak the word on behalf of you, my brothers and my sisters. And I will know with you and affirm with you and confirm that what we talk about here, we bring about. that the prayer is so potent and powerful that it shall not return void, and that everything that you do from this moment forward, every thought that you think, every breath that you take, that you begin to realize that it is all the presence of God moving you to higher ground, to go to the mountaintop, to see as God sees, that there is a plan for your existence, that there is purpose and meaning, that there is something even more than hope. There is the promise. And so the promise, my friends, is that you have come fully equipped, that you have permission to stand in your spiritual authority. And it is by means of this spiritual authority that you will cultivate a consciousness that will simply think, and the world, my friends, will know. And so we know that this is the truth. We know that something miraculous happens when we move into a deeper relationship with the divine, when we begin to commune moment by moment and we surrender into the totality and the essence of that which is seen and unseen. Because there is a place in the universe. It is the womb of God, and it is by which there that all of us have been birthed onto and into this existence. We have come by divine appointment. And so let it be known that the truth is that we call forth that this church right here, that it is holy ground. It is holy ground because it cultivates and it reminds those who come through its doors that you have great work to do. And that when you go forth, that you shall prosper this truth, that you shall multiply, you shall cultivate, and you shall seed into existence by means of who you are, the actions that you take, the words that you say, the prayers that you utter, and the power that resides within you, that you are willing to stand up in a world that has told you from time before time to sit down and to shut up. And yet God says, rise and speak so loudly that the world can only hear the voice of God, and it shall shut out the whimper and the lies and the chaos and the confusion of a world that says that it is for some and not all. So by means of this prayer, by means of this cultivation of consciousness, we accept and we know, just for like that young woman, my friends, she may have been what she was, but who she is eternal. Who she is the presence of God. And who she shall become, my friends, she now knows that she has a choice. And so we can choose again, individually and collectively. So my friends, I leave you with this. Where is it written that you can be anything and everything that you desire? It is written in the soul of the universe, beyond the great beyond. And when it gets dark, I ask that you go to the center of it all, and you sit and you hold and you anchor the vision, and you allow God to love you as if you've never been loved before, and you remember that it was within you all along, and you are not alone. For this and for so much more, we rain praise and peace that passes human understanding across all leaders of this nation and all nations. Because what we do here on this day matters so greatly, because it frees the masses to be reminded something within them, a voice, a feeling, a knowing, shall rise to the mountaintop, and they will remember that they are the ones, by means of their spiritual authority, that will change their life and the life of their children. For this, we just take the breath in, we let it go, and we literally let God do for us, through us, as us, that which we cannot do for ourselves. And in gratitude, we say, and so it is. Amen.